What's up, y'all? This is Matt Walsh's speech at a college on masculinity, and I thought it was I watched a few minutes of it, and I thought that it was a really good topic that I think I should react to and post on my channel because he says a lot of knowledgeable stuff in there. I haven't watched the full thing yet. I watched only some of it, like 15 minutes into it. I thought it was pretty good, so I'm reacting to it. I'm eating dinner right now too, so yeah. So let's get into it.
Yeah? All right, there we go. Nice. Okay, thanks everyone for being here. Even if some of you are only here to tear me apart in the Q&A, I appreciate you as well, though, jerks. And I want you to keep one thing in mind. It's neither here nor there. It doesn't really matter. But I did tear my Achilles a few months ago, and I'm still disabled. Therefore, attacking me would be a hate crime. But do what you want to do. I'm not telling you, but commit a federal hate crime if you want to. Go ahead. I'm just letting you know. My original plan with this talk was to discuss the left's war on reality, as was advertised, the war being waged primarily through the efforts to redefine life, marriage, and gender. This is a talk that I've given on a number of campuses, and I enjoy giving it because, frankly, it's a really good talk, if I'm being honest with you. It's also an important subject. However, my last talk was live streamed, as is the one tonight. And so I was told that
I'll just skip ahead to like the part where you like starts getting into it.
Particularly young men. Now, I'm not really talking that there is much more of a coordinated, sustained, all-encompassing, suffocating effort to attack men, particularly young men. Now, I'm not really talking about rights. This is not a discussion of rights. Okay, I think we talk about rights too much, to be honest with you. So much that nobody even knows what rights are anymore. It's just a buzzword. So much that nobody seems to grasp the distinction between a statement like, you shouldn't do or say such and such, and you shouldn't be allowed to do or say such and such. This is why anytime you criticize, I'm sure you've noticed, if you criticize any behavior or any opinion whatsoever, invariably someone's going to rush in and say, well, I have a right to do that. Well, nobody said you didn't. But just because we say that a certain behavior is bad, stupid, whatever, doesn't mean we're saying that you don't have a right to do it. Unless we are saying that, and of course there are bad and stupid things you shouldn't have a right to do, but if that's the case being made, then you'll know it. As to rights, American women have nothing to complain about. Feminists like to pretend that the fight for women's rights is alive and well because they make a lot of money pretending that. These feminist organizations do. But the fight is over. There's nothing to fight for anymore. Women have all the same rights as men, and indeed have some legal rights that men don't have. For example, the right to murder their children. Women are unique in that they have absolute authority over the life and death of their child in utero. Men have no legal say whatsoever at all. No right. Women have all the rights. So just contemplate, meditate upon this disparity. A woman and a man together conceive a child. It's both of their children. For 9 months thereafter, the woman has the absolute authority to kill that child, and it does not matter what the father says. Now, whatever else you have to say about that, you must admit that that is a right and a power that women have legally that men do not. But as I said, this conversation isn't really about rights. It's about how the culture works. It's about attitudes. It's about powerful forces in our society that not necessarily legal forces. And it's about how we got to a point, speaking of inequality, where the vast majority of drug addicts, homeless people, prisoners, suicides, dropouts, and homicide victims are all men. That's male privilege for you, by the way. When someone talks about male privilege, what are they really saying? Well, males have the privilege to
He's not wrong.
die young, basically. Whether by murder, overdose, suicide, combat, execution. How did we get to this point? Why is our culture so bad for boys and to boys? Bad for girls too, it's bad for everybody. But I think we fail to recognize and appreciate the unique struggles that boys face. Partly we fail to recognize it because we are too busy, as I said, worrying about the mythological patriarchy's persecution of women. Partly we fail to recognize it because collectively we just don't care that much about boys, if we're being honest. Partly we fail to recognize it because men are not as likely to talk about their own plight. And partly a man will not talk about it because everybody else, including fellow men, will only laugh at him and downplay the problem. So here are some factors to consider. Number one, our culture preys on a boy's weaknesses. Now let's imagine the world that the average 13-year-old boy inhabits, okay? He has long since been exposed to hardcore pornography, probably watches it regularly. The average age of first exposure is now 10. According to some studies, it's 8 or 9 or younger.
10 or 9 or younger is the average age of kid these days watches porn. It's messed up, man.
Then puberty hits. His hormones are going haywire. His brain is hardwiring itself to focus obsessively on sex. He cannot really help it. He feels the biological impulse to go out and find a sexual partner. This is biology. Though he doesn't understand this urge, and his conception of human sexuality has been perverted and confused by the porn habit that he developed in 6th grade. The boy cannot escape sex. It's all over his computer, it's all over his phone, it's all over social media, it's all over the TV, it's all over the music he listens to, it's all over everywhere. It seems that everyone is doing everything they can to make a degenerate and a creep out of him, even as they demand that he be the opposite of that. We ask for self-discipline, self-control from the boy while providing him none of the tools to develop them. Rather than tools, we give him temptation, non-stop temptation, everywhere he goes, all day, every day, right at the moment when his brain is least capable of dealing with it. And even if the boy possesses the almost superhuman moral fortitude required to pursue chastity and purity in the midst of the sex-choked fog that engulfs him, that he has been raised in, he'll only meet mockery and discouragement from our society. The very people who demand that he respect women and control himself will heap scorn on him if he tries to do exactly that. Again, the boy will need to call upon his superhuman courage to ignore the jeers just as he rejects the temptation so that he can walk the path to virtue on his own with no help from anyone. Now, most boys don't have this courage. Most adults don't have it. Yet we expect of our boys a virtue that we do not possess and have never demonstrated. Number two, the education system is designed for girls.
Yep.
There is a reason why girls outperform boys in school. Girls are not smarter on average, but they have an easier time because the classroom is set up to reward the calm and organized demeanor more natural to them. This is why I have no patience for any claim that society is set up in such a way to oppress women. Give me a break. They start their lives in the education system. The first 13, 14 years, their formative years, they are in an environment that is tailored to them. Boys are more rambunctious. They have more physical energy. They're less able to sit still, less able to focus attentively on one dull task for a prolonged period of time. This, again, is biology. The typical classroom environment is torture for a boy. It penalizes him for being himself. It penalizes him for being a boy. As a result, boys get lower grades. As a result, boys are more likely to drop out. As a result, boys are more likely to be suspended and expelled. Perhaps worst of all, boys are twice as likely to be diagnosed with ADHD. Why do we never question this? By high school, 20% of boys, 20% are diagnosed. 20%. Yet we never stop to ask ourselves why boys are more susceptible to this mysterious mental illness or disorder. We never stop to consider that perhaps we are not so much diagnosing boys as we are diagnosing boyhood. See, if the school system were not predicated on sitting still and memorizing things, and it need not be, but it is, there would be no ADHD. The ADHD diagnosis is, after all, situational. One of the first things they ask you, if you take your child to the doctor and say, gee, doc, I think he has ADHD, and it's very easy to get that diagnosis confirmed. One of the first things they're going to want to know is whether your child's lack of attention is causing significant problems in school. But why should that matter? What difference does that make? If this is an actual mental disorder, who cares if it causes problems or not in school? Think about it. If you take your child to the doctor for juvenile diabetes, they aren't going to ask you if it's causing problems in school. Diabetes is diabetes, but ADHD is not always ADHD. Back in old agrarian societies, they didn't have ADHD. Didn't exist. Why is that? Well, because it wasn't a problem for a boy back then to have lots of physical energy. In fact, it was necessary. Now it's a problem because we want him to sit still for the first 18 years of his life. And so we call it ADHD. Do we see a problem here? We have arbitrarily decided that every child must be the sort of child who thrives in that specific environment. Even if you have to stuff pills into his face to make it happen and force the issue, we've decided that that's how it has to be. Girls are not drugged nearly as often because most of them are already the sort of people that the school system prefers. The school system prefers girls. And if the boy doesn't act like a girl, they're going to see to it that he does.
Yep.
Now, every time I discuss the dangers of ADHD medication, I'm informed that I can't possibly know what I'm talking about because my children do not have this disorder.
Yeah, bro. The school system was actually like it's so poopily designed that like, dude, he's not wrong. It literally was designed for girls. Like, and like it sucks because like men. Do you really think men are supposed to sit still for 7 hours a fucking day? Be a good boy. Sit there. Just sit there and be quiet. Be quiet and sit there and listen. It's not how we are meant to be. It's not what we're supposed to do. Listen to the teacher. Listen to the authority figure. It's not how man's supposed to be. Oh, no fighting. No goofing off. Don't be a boy. How dare you be a boy? Don't you dare be a boy. Don't you dare. That's how the school system is. Don't you dare mess around with your friends. Don't you dare play around. Don't you dare. Don't you dare fight that kid. Don't get into a fight. Don't you dare ever do that. Men aren't supposed to fight. You're supposed to sit there and be a good little boy.
Of course, the assumption that people who have been personally affected by a certain thing must therefore be more knowledgeable about it and more credible when discussing it is ridiculous. This is why so many conversations these days are very difficult, because you're trying to talk about something in principle, and then someone comes in and that says, well, let me tell you my personal story about how I've been affected by this. I empathize with your personal story. It's actually irrelevant, though, to this conversation. Just because you have car trouble doesn't make you a mechanic. If it did, we wouldn't need mechanics. But as it happens, I do have experience. My 6-year-old boy fits the ADHD label by any measure. To simply call my 6-year-old son, energetic would be a fantastic understatement. He's like a squirrel that just ate a pound of coffee beans. Runs through the house at breakneck speed, fighting off imaginary pirates and dragons. He pole vaults over banisters, jumps over couches, literally bounces off the walls, literally climbs the walls, literally climbs them. Like, I walked into the room the other day, and I didn't see anyone in the room, and I look over, and he's on the wall, and I'm like that, and he had shimmied his way up the wall like this, and he was just hanging out up there. I don't know. It was like something from The Exorcist, but... He can't sit still or stop talking, and you can't stop him from talking by leaving the room. He'll continue the conversation even with no one there to respond to him. He's a little bit like his mother in that way. She's not watching this. It's okay. He reminds me a lot of Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone, wandering around the house narrating himself to himself. Now, he does have trouble learning academically in a formal setting. His twin sister is significantly more advanced when it comes to ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. She's also capable of sitting still for several minutes at a time, coloring or drawing or, brushing her doll's hair or whatever. She even likes to clean for some reason. She's better at it than I am. My son cleans by picking up all the items on the floor and throwing them onto the nearest piece of furniture and then jumping on the pile. Now, he could easily earn an ADHD diagnosis if we sought one, but we're not going to seek one because the boy is not sick. He's not disordered. The boy is a boy. More of a handful than some boys, less of a handful than others. That's his personality. That's who he is. And I cannot imagine treating it like the manifestation of a mental disease. Besides, like almost every other kid with an actual ADHD diagnosis, he can learn, he can focus. He just doesn't always learn the things we want him to learn in the way we want him to learn them. He can't remember how to spell things all the time. He knows, he knows his superheroes backwards and forwards. Not useful information, but it is information anyway. Knows a lot about pilgrims and Indians because that's a historical story that fascinates him. He knows about ants and bugs. He knows about the migratory patterns of sharks. He knows about
history.
rocket ships and astronauts. Knows a lot of stuff. Now, if we had enrolled him in public school, they'd tell us that he has a learning disability. But he learns all the time. He loves to learn, just in his own way and about topics that interest him.
Yes.
Is the kid disabled because he doesn't like sitting at a desk and regurgitating information? Whoever decreed that every human being in the world must be able to learn that way? So what if he can't? Is it wrong that he prefers to go out in the woods and actually, pick up the bug and learn about it that way than just hearing facts about it in a classroom? Now, obviously, we need to teach our boys to be obedient and respectful, and they really do need to calm
Me
down.
personally, I learn more physically by physically doing it, not just by staring at a teacher and hearing her talk about information. I just learn better by physically getting into it and doing it.
Sometimes and be quiet, but boys also need to be boys. And I'm afraid they're rarely given that opportunity these days because they're always being told, no, stop, calm down, be quiet, sit still. Maybe in school we carve out 45 minutes the whole day for them to let out their energy. And I'm told now that even that gym class, they're getting rid of. Someone sent me an email the other day and said gym class is now lifestyle sports or something like that. Lifestyle activities is what they call gym class now. And you sit and you do Scamtron examinations rather than just going out and running around in the mud or on the field. I think we're ruining our sons this way. We are robbing them of themselves. It's the worst kind of selfishness. It's the worst kind of narrow-mindedness. The problem is us, not them. We are the ones who need to change. If there is no room in our schools, in our homes, in our culture for boys who act like boys, then our schools and home and culture need to change. It's that is sick, not our boys. If we have established a system that cannot handle half of the kids who are fed into it, then the system is broken. Tear the system down, but leave the boys alone. Number 4, masculinity is denigrated. Now, you might think we've already done enough to these boys. We've made our point. We've shoved sex in their face, deprived them of role models, forced them into an education system that treats their personality like a disease. But we're not satisfied. In case any of them have survived that gauntlet, we then attempt to bury them in self-loathing. Now, femininity is attacked also in our culture, but nobody would ever call femininity itself toxic or fragile. It's unthinkable. No one would ever say that. Nobody ever talks about female privilege, even though, as I've demonstrated, females enjoy many privileges in this society. Nobody would ever label all women dangerous or, quote, potential monsters to be feared, as someone from the New York Times recently said about men. In fact, new guidelines from the American Psychological Association recently declared that masculinity is, quote, harmful. A post on the APA website explains recently, says, prior to the second wave feminist movement in the 1960s, all psychology was psychology of men. Most major studies were done only on white men and boys who stood in as proxies for humans as a whole. Researchers assumed that masculinity and femininity were opposite ends of a spectrum, and healthy psychology entailed identifying strongly with the gender roles conferred by a person's biological sex. Let me just interject here. Yes, masculinity and femininity are opposite ends of the spectrum, and it is healthy to identify with your biological sex. But not according to the mental health experts over at the APA. Now, it continues. In 2007, researchers led by James Malik of Boston College found that the more men conformed to masculine norms, the more likely they were to consider as normal risky health behaviors such as heavy drinking, using tobacco, and avoiding vegetables. I confess I was a little excited to see avoiding vegetables listed as a risky behavior. Been feeling a little bit lame lately as I get older. And I was thinking, I need to do something risky, maybe buy a motorcycle, join an underground bare knuckle boxing league or something. But now I've discovered that I take my life into my hands every time that I skip the salad bar at Ruby Tuesday. Anyway, the main thrust of recent research, according to this article, is that traditionally masculine traits such as, quote, stoicism, competitiveness, dominance, and aggression are harmful. Among other things, we're told that all of these stoically aggressive men are reluctant to seek...
Those things he just said are vital to masculinity. Stoicism, competition. Competition is great for your testosterone levels and masculinity. Yep.
Self-care, including psychological care. Now, I wonder, could it be that men are reluctant to consult psychologists in part because the psychological community has labeled them all disordered? Is it possible that we do not feel particularly inclined to open up to someone who believes that our most fundamental character traits are harmful and poisonous? That is, after all, the crux of these new guidelines. If stoicism, competitiveness, and aggression are on the whole harmful, then manhood itself is harmful. Those traits are natural to men. Not every man has them to the same degree. Perhaps some men hardly display them at all, but in general, men are more emotionally reserved, more aggressive, more competitive, more physically dominant.
Yep.
It didn't become this way because society engineered it. It already was this way. It has always been this way.
Trust our biology,
Society
man.
did not invent masculinity. Society rather noticed masculinity. And that's why throughout history, societies across the world, even those who never came in contact with each other, had unknowingly come to certain near unanimous agreements about the roles of men. In most civilizations, not all but most, men did things like hunt and fight wars and protect their homes, play violent games of various sorts. Many civilizations across the world had coming-of-age rituals for boys that were focused on making sure that the boy is tough, strong, self-sufficient, and so on.
That's something we honestly have a lack in these days. I honestly think we should have a coming of age thing, like a ceremony for a boy to like it's just something I think we should really have is like a ceremony for all men, all teenagers and young men. It's like you are a man now.
Like stoicism, competitiveness, dominance, aggression were, again, in civilizations that had never come in contact with each other, encouraged and celebrated in men. You think about just one example, even when the Spanish and the Aztecs met back in the 16th century. Two civilizations that had at that point never encountered each other, two civilizations that were alien to each other in so many fundamental ways. But still, a lot of these very basic notions of manhood were shared by the two. That's how they were able to, in some way, understand each other. Of course, it manifested in different ways. The Aztecs ripped out human hearts, and I guess you'd call that toxic masculinity these days. But the point here is that even from an anthropological perspective, it is evident that masculinity is not some arbitrary invention. It is ingrained and innate. Number 5. Society intentionally sows confusion into the minds of boys. There has been, as you may have noticed, an overwhelming push in recent years to impose gender confusion onto children. Now, boys seem to be the special targets again of this. They seem to be the ones who most commonly fall victim to it. Though, of course, girls here are victims as well. Now, this push is being made by all of the powerful forces in our culture, from Hollywood to media to academia to corporations to government to the courts to the medical industry, and so on. Even on the very local level, even in conservative areas, you find it. You can go to a small town library in a red county in the South and find drag queens reading to children. Now, what is the point of this?
It's fucking sick,
Yes,
man.
the library wants to do a story time for children. That's great. Why do you need men dressed like women from a Tim Burton film to be the ones doing the reading? What is the purpose of that? The purpose, quite plainly, is to normalize, that is, promote this kind of lifestyle to children. There could be no other reason. And efforts like this on the local and broader level have been tragically and horrifically and infuriatingly effective. More and more children, most often boys, end up falling prey to this disorder. And when they do, when a boy expresses a perfectly natural, given the circumstances, confusion about his gender, rather than alleviating that confusion, rather than explaining the truth to him, his parents and the schools and the doctors are often eager to foment the confusion, fertilize it, water it, make it grow. It should be very easy if your 4-year-old boy comes to you and says, Mommy, I'm a girl. It's very easy to say, no, you're not. That's it. That's all you have to say. But now you have these insane, abusive parents who hear that from a 4-year-old and say, well, my God, you must be a girl. And they'll even use chemicals and drugs to seal the deal. It is legal in this country to give children the same drug they use to chemically castrate sex offenders. A gender-confused boy can be legally chemically castrated in this country and it is happening, all because he didn't understand some basic facts about himself and about sex. And why didn't he understand them? Because nobody ever told him. Here's the reality, of course. A child cannot choose his gender. A very young child cannot reliably make any choice in any context. Take a child to Baskin-Robbins, ask him which flavor he prefers. He'll give you 14 different answers before collapsing into tears. Have you ever been behind a parent at a place like Baskin-Robbins who is asking the child and going through, oh, you want that? Okay, you want vanilla? You want strawberry? And you're sitting there for 6.5 hours waiting for him to make up his mind? You let him decide what outfit he's going to wear. You know, he'll emerge from his room wearing one shoe, no pants, underwear on his head. And I know this from experience. Allow him to choose his dinner, and he'll be eating a bowl of ketchup with a side of gummy bears and whipped cream. That's because children can't make up their minds. A child at a young age has not developed the cognitive ability to assess a variety of options and decide which course is correct, safe, and healthy. He literally can't do it. He doesn't have the ability. It's not his fault. He's a child. And he's not going to have that ability for several more years, and if he grows up to be a leftist, he'll never have that ability. But, sorry, I had to throw it in. Of course, nobody... I say a child can't choose his own gender. Nobody can choose their own gender. That matter is irrevocably settled by our chromosomes and our reproductive organs and dozens of other biological markers that are unique to men or women and that are the things that determine whether you are one of those things. But the leftist position here is so preposterous that even if one grants the absurd premise that gender can theoretically be chosen, the left would still be wrong in thinking that children, even as young as 3 years old, they tell us, can choose it. There are a lot of things that we all agree that people in principle can choose, but we also agree that, of course, children can't choose those things.
Do you know why I'd rather become an online closer and make $1,000 to $4,000 a day selling for...
They can't vote, they can't drive, they can't take out a mortgage, they can't buy a gun, they can't buy a ticket for an R-rated movie, they can't buy alcohol, they can't buy cigarettes, they can't buy anything because they're too young to do so. Young children cannot grasp the distinction between fantasy and reality. This is another thing that's missed. That's why I always think it's funny when parents torture themselves about, this is among Christian parents around the holidays, you hear this discussion about, am I going to tell my child that Santa Claus is real? Well, if he's young enough, it won't matter what you tell him because it's not going to mean anything. If you go to a 3-year-old and say Santa Claus is not real, they will not know what you mean by that. It will mean nothing to them. My oldest son, about 4 years old at the time, once tried to, as I told you, he likes to leap over things. Well, he tried to leap over a banister once, a couple years ago. Only problem is the banister was on the 2nd floor. And I stopped him just in time, and I warned him very sternly that he must never do that again. And he said that he'll be fine because Spider-Man jumps off stuff all the time. And I explained that Spider-Man isn't real, and he said, no, you're wrong, Daddy. I know he's real. I've seen him on TV. Now, are we supposed to believe that people this ignorant and immature, so innocently detached from reality, I think beautifully, wonderfully detached from reality as a child, are we supposed to believe that they can make meaningful declarations about their own gender? A boy who says he's a girl doesn't even know what a girl is. Adult leftists don't know what a girl is either. But at least the child has an excuse. So the next time you hear a young boy make this claim about himself, here's a very simple thing for all these idiot parents who are confused by this. The child comes to you and says, I'm a girl. Simple follow-up question, what's a girl? Now, if you listen to his answer, I guarantee you will discover that I'm a girl really means something like, my sister's dollhouse looks cool and I'd like to play with it. See, his declaration of being a girl is really a declaration that he is interested in some of the things that his little toddler brain associates with girls. That's what he means. Now, as adults, it is our job to help children sort through this confusion. We're supposed to be the ones grounded in reality, the ones who understand the distinction between fantasy and reality. If we fail to delineate between those two, our children have no chance. So those are 5 major ways that our culture attacks boys. Now the question is, what can we do about it? How can we counteract it? Well, that's a larger question than I have time to fully answer. I think for one thing, there should be laws passed on some of these issues. You know, I'm not much of a libertarian myself, and I believe in passing laws. I prefer good laws. So applause for laws over there. Good. Laws are good. Well, good laws are good. That's my provocative opinion. So I believe that pornography should be banned under the same principle and for the same reason that prostitution is banned. Pornography, after all, is just prostitution with a camera.
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense to me. You know, prostitution is, legal in 1 state, illegal in 49, I think. And so what we're saying is, well, you can't get paid for sex, you can't monetize sex, unless you put a camera in the room, and then it's okay. What? Shouldn't it be more illegal in that case? Now that you're involving more people, how does that make it legal now? It doesn't make any sense to me. There should be laws against castrating children. You know, it's amazing that such laws are necessary, but they are. In my opinion, these parents who dress their sons up as girls and bring them to perform at gay nightclubs as drag queens, those parents should be arrested and thrown in jail.
People do that?
For child abuse. I think our entire approach to education needs to change from the bottom up. It all needs to be reworked. The mass-produced, assembly line, factory-style education system just doesn't work. It especially doesn't work for boys. A more localized, more personalized, freer, less stringent form of education is needed. This is where homeschooling comes into play. And of course, finally, we need fathers to be fathers.
Yes.
Boys need to be taught how to be boys, and they need fathers to do the teaching. A mother cannot teach her son how to be a man.
Yep.
Any more than I can teach my daughter how to be a woman.
Yep.
Now, I can teach her, which is really important, how a woman ought to be treated by a man, but I cannot shape her in her femininity the way that my wife can.
Yep.
Likewise, my wife cannot form and harness our son's masculinity the way that I can.
Yep.
Neither can we rely on TV or pop culture or the schools to do the job. They're not going to mold my sons. They will simply obliterate them. Everywhere a boy turns, if he cannot turn to his father, he will find powerful forces trying desperately to drag him into despair, confusion, and self-loathing. Now, the feminists say that masculinity is fragile, and actually, in a way, they're sort of right. A young boy's identity is a fragile thing. It needs to be protected. A boy is bursting with energy, dreams, ambitions. He feels a deep longing to use that energy, take those ambitions, do something with it. He needs someone, his father preferably, to show him what that thing ought to be. Or else he will figure it out on his own, finding no help anywhere else, and the result may literally kill him, and perhaps dozens of other people along with him, as we've seen. A girl needs guidance too, but she has some advantages. For one, almost every home in America features a mom. Good. For another, most schools are staffed and run primarily by women. For another, our culture is extraordinarily focused on empowering and encouraging girls and telling them how beautiful they are, how valuable and important and strong and wonderful. You know, a woman's cosmetic products, their commercials are all, you're beautiful, you're wonderful, you're priceless. Whereas recently, a man's cosmetic commercials are, you're scum, you're this, start scolding you. And I think there you see the difference. A girl looks for fulfillment in her home and in her relationships. She's calmer, more relational, more domestic. A boy feels the indescribable, uncontainable urge to go out into the wild and find fulfillment in something out there, just out there. He doesn't know precisely what or where, and the culture comes along like a snake in the garden and says, go that way, try that over there. And if the boy follows, he'll be led potentially into a lifetime of failure and misery, as so many have. And that's where the father is needed, to come to the rescue, to stomp on the serpent, to take this boy's hand, to look him in the eye, to tell him, you're a boy, that is good, that is wonderful. One day you'll be a man, I will show you how. I will show you the way. Follow me.
I like that.
That's what a boy needs. And many will never get it.
But it's also important that the father is a good father too, and not, because there is fathers out there who are honestly like shitty parents. Yeah, so it's important that like men have good fathers too, or boys and men, same thing.
And we will
Not same
hate
thing.
them for what they become because of it. But it didn't have to turn out that way. If only someone had been there, if only they'd been given a chance. That's all I got, guys. Thank you.
All right. Oh, Jesus. All right, it's now time for the Q&A.
So yeah, that's pretty much it on Matt Walsh speaking about masculinity and how modern culture is honestly messing it all up. Now, if you're actually still here and you watched that entire thing with me, you're an absolute goat. But yeah, it makes me honestly sick how modern culture is designed to honestly just mess up young men and confuse them and lead them down the wrong path. And that's another thing that we don't. I think honestly we have a lack of fathers because like there's so many single moms these days because the court usually favors the mother, leaving what like Matt Walsh said. Um, a mother can't shape a boy into a man like a man can shape a boy into a man. Same goes with girls. A man can't shape a girl. A father cannot shape his daughter into a woman like her mother can shape her. You know what I mean. But yeah, it's important. It's really important that we. I have no idea how you sat through that if you're a girl, but it's time for us young men to start fighting for what's ours. Masculinity. So that's all I have for today. Stay masculine. Don't act like a girl, unless you are a girl. Stay hungry. Stay hard. Peace.